Sit down, Victoria. You're a nobody. My father's voice cut through the Pentagon briefing room like a blade, his three-star general's authority making 200 officers turn and stare at the daughter he was publicly humiliating. General Robert Sterling had just dismissed my tactical analysis in front of the Joint Chiefs, reminding everyone that I was the family disappointment who would never amount to anything in the military. For 28 years, he had crushed every achievement, stolen every success, and made sure I remained invisible in his shadow. But as I sat down in shame, the briefing room doors burst open and a SEAL colonel rushed in with desperate urgency. "I need Ghost 13 immediately," he announced to the silent room. "We have American hostages and need our best operative now." What happened next would change everything my father thought he knew about the nobody daughter he'd been destroying for decades. If you've ever watched family arrogance collapse under truth, type "vindicated" below. The humiliation began when I was 8 years old, standing in my father's study at Fort Bragg while he explained why I would never be good enough to carry the Sterling family name. General Robert Sterling sat behind his massive oak desk, surrounded by 3 decades of military commendations and photographs that documented his rise through the Army's most elite ranks. "Victoria," he said with a clinical precision he used for delivering bad news to subordinates, "excellence is not inherited. It must be earned through discipline, sacrifice, and an understanding of one's limitations." I had come to show him my science fair project about satellite communications, hoping to earn some acknowledgement from a father whose approval seemed reserved for achievements that met his impossible standards. Instead, I received my first lesson in family hierarchy and personal inadequacy. "Your project demonstrates adequate effort," he continued, barely glancing at the research I had spent months preparing. "But adequacy is not excellence. Sterling men have commanded divisions and shaped military doctrine. Sterling women, well, they support their husbands' careers and raise the next generation of warriors." The casual dismissal of my capabilities based on gender was delivered with the authority of someone whose opinion shaped military policy at the highest levels. General Sterling wasn't just my father, he was a legend whose tactical innovations had influenced warfare doctrine across multiple theaters of operation. Over the following years, this dynamic became the defining characteristic of our relationship. I excelled academically, graduated valedictorian from West Point, and earned advanced degrees in strategic studies and international relations. But every achievement was minimized, every success was attributed to luck or lowered standards, and every ambition was treated as evidence of my failure to understand my proper place in military hierarchy. "Women in the military serve important support functions," my father explained during one family dinner when I announced my acceptance into the Army's intelligence officer program. "But operational leadership requires qualities that simply aren't compatible with feminine psychology." My mother, Patricia, nodded with the understanding of someone who had spent 20 years as a military spouse, carefully managing her husband's social obligations while avoiding any activities that might suggest ambitions beyond supporting his career. "Your father knows what he's talking about, Victoria. Military leadership is extraordinarily demanding, and women who try to compete with men in operational roles usually end up disappointed." I listened to these assessments while secretly maintaining academic performance that exceeded most of my male classmates and developing tactical insights that my professors praised as innovative and sophisticated. But my family's dismissal of my capabilities extended beyond casual conversation into active sabotage of my military career. When I was selected for advanced intelligence training at Fort Huachka, my father used his influence to have me reassigned to an administrative position that would better match my skill set. "I'm protecting you from failure," he explained when I confronted him about the intervention. "Operational intelligence requires decision-making under pressure that could get soldiers killed. I won't allow my daughter to be responsible for American deaths because she was too proud to accept appropriate assignments." The pattern continued throughout my early military career. Promotions were delayed through his behind-the-scenes influence. Promising assignments were redirected to male officers who demonstrated better leadership potential. And my research on tactical innovations was consistently attributed to supervisors who had contributed nothing to the actual analysis. The breaking point came during my assignment to the Strategic Studies Division, where I had developed groundbreaking research on asymmetric warfare tactics that could reshape how American forces approached counterinsurgency. I had been invited to present my findings to a joint military intelligence briefing that included representatives from all service branches and senior officials from the CIA and NSA. The presentation would have established me as a serious strategic thinker whose work merited recognition at the highest levels of military leadership. "Your research is excellent," he agreed with diplomatic praise that set up devastating dismissal. "But presenting strategic analysis to senior leadership requires gravitas that comes from operational experience and command authority. You'll assist me during the briefing by organizing the supporting materials." The theft of my intellectual work was accomplished with military efficiency and bureaucratic legitimacy. My research was repackaged under his authority, my innovations became his strategic insights, and my months of analysis were reduced to supporting materials that justified his presence on the presentation agenda. I sat in the Pentagon briefing room watching my father receive praise for tactical innovations I had developed, listening to flag officers discuss implementation of strategies I had conceived, and witnessing my career advancement being sacrificed to protect his reputation as a visionary military leader. "General Sterling," said Admiral Hayes, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, "your analysis of asymmetric warfare represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking our forces need. This research could reshape how we approach counterinsurgency operations worldwide." My father accepted the praise with practiced humility, occasionally acknowledging the excellent support staff who helped compile the supporting data, but never mentioning that the strategic framework had been entirely my conception. But the most devastating humiliation was still to come. During the question and answer session, I identified a critical flaw in one of the implementation strategies that could result in American casualties if the tactical framework was deployed without modification. The issue was complex, but correctable, requiring adjustment to coordination protocols that I had specifically researched. I raised my hand with the professional courtesy that junior officers showed when contributing to senior leadership discussions. "Excuse me, sir," I said to Admiral Hayes. "I believe there's an important tactical consideration that requires clarification regarding the coordination protocols outlined in the third operational framework." The room fell silent as 200 senior military and intelligence officials turned to look at the junior officer who had interrupted their strategic discussion. My father's face went white with rage as he realized that his daughter was about to demonstrate expertise that contradicted his narrative about her limitations. "Sit down, Victoria," he said with commanding authority that carried across the silent briefing room. "You're a nobody. This discussion is for professionals who understand strategic implications." The words, "you're a nobody," echoed through the Pentagon's most secure briefing room like artillery fire, each syllable designed to destroy my credibility in front of the military and intelligence leadership who would determine my career prospects. 200 pairs of eyes watched as I absorbed the most public humiliation possible in military circles, being dismissed as incompetent by my own father in front of the officers whose respect would determine my professional future. I sat down, as ordered, feeling the weight of career-ending embarrassment while my father continued presenting research I had developed, taking credit for innovations that could save American lives in combat zones I would apparently never be qualified to influence. But what my father didn't know was that CIA Deputy Director Harrison had been watching this entire exchange with the analytical attention that made him legendary in intelligence circles. He understood family dynamics, recognized intellectual capability when he saw it, and had spent 30 years identifying assets who could operate effectively under pressure. 3 weeks after the Pentagon briefing, I received a message through official channels requesting my presence at a classified facility in Langley, Virginia, for what was described as a career development consultation with senior intelligence officials. I assumed the meeting was related to my public humiliation and the need to discuss remedial career planning for officers whose advancement potential had been compromised by family conflicts. Instead, I found myself in the CIA's most secure conference room facing Deputy Director Harrison and 3 officials whose titles were classified but whose authority was unmistakable. "Major Sterling," said Deputy Director Harrison, with the kind of professional respect I hadn't experienced in military settings, "your research on asymmetric warfare and tactical innovation represents exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need for operations that require unconventional approaches." I listened with confusion as senior intelligence officials discussed my research in terms that suggested they understood its actual value rather than treating it as supporting material for my father's presentations. "We're interested in offering you an opportunity that would utilize your analytical capabilities in ways that conventional military assignments cannot provide. The program requires psychological resilience and the ability to operate independently in environments where traditional command structures don't apply," explained Colonel Martinez, whose military bearing suggested extensive special operations background. "You would be designated Ghost 13, operating with presidential authorization on missions that officially don't exist." The recruitment process took 6 months of psychological evaluation, tactical training, and security clearance reviews that examined every aspect of my personal and professional background. But at the end of the process, I emerged as something my father had never imagined, a classified CIA operative with capabilities that exceeded anything in his military experience. Ghost 13 operated in the shadows between military and intelligence operations, conducting missions that combined strategic analysis with direct action to eliminate threats before they could develop into conventional military problems. My first operation involved infiltrating a terrorist network in Eastern Europe that was planning attacks on American military installations. The mission required 6 months of deep cover work, psychological manipulation of enemy assets, and tactical coordination that prevented 3 separate terrorist attacks while gathering intelligence that led to the elimination of an entire enemy network. The success was classified at levels that prohibited any public acknowledgement, but it established my reputation within the intelligence community as an operator who could achieve strategic objectives through methods that conventional forces couldn't employ. Over the following 3 years, Ghost 13 conducted operations across 4 continents, preventing international incidents, eliminating high-value targets, and gathering intelligence that shaped American foreign policy. My tactical innovations were implemented across all CIA Special Operations units, and my psychological warfare techniques were studied at classified facilities where the nation's most elite operators were trained. But my family remained ignorant of these achievements, continuing to treat me as the disappointing daughter whose military career had stagnated due to personal limitations. "Victoria seems to be struggling with advancement," my father observed during one family gathering, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose predictions about my inadequacy had been proven accurate. "I've heard she's been assigned to some kind of analytical support role, not surprising given her limitations." I listened to these assessments while coordinating operations that prevented the kind of international conflicts that would require deployment of conventional military forces my father commanded. The irony was perfect. While my family celebrated his tactical expertise and strategic leadership, I was operating at classification levels that exceeded his security clearance, conducting missions that he would never be authorized to learn about. But the most devastating confrontation was still approaching, triggered by my father's attempt to access classified information about operations he wasn't cleared to know about. 6 months after my third successful overseas mission, I received urgent communication from CIA security officials. General Sterling has been attempting to access classified files related to Talon Division operations. This constitutes potential violation of the Espionage Act and requires immediate intervention. My father's arrogance had finally led him to commit a federal crime, and Ghost 13 was about to be revealed in the most dramatic way possible. The call came at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning, jolting me from sleep in my classified quarters at Langley. The encrypted phone displayed Priority 1 communication from Deputy Director Harrison, which meant either international crisis or compromised operations requiring immediate attention. Ghost 13. Harrison's voice carried the tension that marked critical operational moments. We have a security breach that requires your immediate presence. General Sterling has been attempting unauthorized access to Talon Division files for the past 6 hours. I felt my blood turn to ice as the implications hit me. My father's arrogance and need for control had finally led him to commit federal crimes, and his actions threatened to expose operations that protected American lives worldwide. How extensive is the breach attempt? I asked, shifting into operational mode while processing the personal devastation of my father's betrayal. Systematic attempts to access classified databases using his Pentagon credentials, Harrison replied with clinical precision. He's been trying to penetrate files related to Eastern European operations, specifically requesting intelligence assessments authored by V. Sterling. The timeline became clear. My father had somehow discovered that I was producing classified intelligence analysis, and his need to control every aspect of my career had driven him to violate federal law in his attempt to understand what I was actually doing for the CIA. "Sir," I said carefully, "what's the operational response protocol for family members who compromise security?" "That's what we need to discuss," Harrison replied with the gravity that marked career-ending conversations. "This situation requires immediate resolution before his activities trigger automatic federal investigation." I arrived at Langley within 40 minutes, driving through the pre-dawn darkness while processing the magnitude of what my father had done. His attempted access to classified databases constituted violations of the Espionage Act that could result in decades of federal imprisonment. The CIA's Crisis Management Center was operating with the controlled intensity that marked responses to threats against national security. Deputy Director Harrison stood before a wall of monitors, displaying my father's unauthorized access attempts, each failed login creating digital evidence of federal crimes. The breach attempts began at 22:30 hours, reported Special Agent Collins, the CIA's internal security chief. General Sterling has been using progressively sophisticated methods to penetrate databases containing Ghost 13 operational reports. I studied the digital trail of my father's criminal activity, watching timestamps that revealed 6 hours of systematic attempts to access information that could compromise operations across multiple theaters. He's been specifically searching for files authored by V. Sterling, Agent Collins continued. The pattern suggests he suspects family connection but lacks understanding of classification levels involved. Deputy Director Harrison addressed me directly with the kind of professional respect that had defined our working relationship for 3 years. "Ghost 13, we need your assessment of General Sterling's motivation and potential security risk." I considered the question with the analytical precision that had made me effective in psychological operations. General Sterling's pattern of behavior suggests need to control family members who exceed his understanding. His attempted access represents desperation rather than foreign intelligence activity. Nevertheless, Harrison said with the authority that had made him legendary in intelligence circles, his actions constitute clear violations of federal law. The Justice Department protocols require immediate intervention. The crisis management session continued for 2 hours as CIA security officials developed protocols that would neutralize the threat while minimizing damage to ongoing operations. but the resolution would require my direct participation in ways that would permanently alter my relationship with my family. Ghost 13, Harrison said finally, we need you to attend tomorrow's Joint Chiefs briefing, where General Sterling will be present. The confrontation will serve multiple operational purposes. The plan was elegant in its psychological warfare implications. My father would be exposed as a federal criminal in front of the military leadership he had spent decades impressing, while Ghost 13 would be revealed as the daughter whose capabilities had driven him to desperate illegal actions. 24 hours later, I sat in the Pentagon's most secure briefing room, watching my father command attention from 200 senior military and intelligence officials. General Sterling was presenting tactical assessments to the Joint Chiefs, displaying the kind of conventional expertise that had defined his career. The current threat environment requires integration of military and intelligence operations, he declared with commanding authority. Traditional boundaries between services must be eliminated to achieve strategic objectives. I listened to this assessment while wearing civilian clothes that concealed the fact that I had spent the previous week conducting exactly the kind of integrated operations he was describing in theoretical terms. But the briefing took an unexpected turn when the conference room doors burst open with urgent military precision. A Navy SEAL colonel rushed into the room with the desperate energy that marked operational emergencies. His face showed the kind of stress that came from American lives hanging in the balance during active missions. I need Ghost 13 immediately, he announced to the silent briefing room, his voice carrying across 200 stunned senior officers. We have American hostages in Somalia, and our operation requires immediate tactical consultation. The request for Ghost 13 created electric tension in a room filled with military and intelligence professionals who understood that such call signs represented the most classified operational capabilities in American service. My father looked confused, but intrigued, curious, wondering what special operations asset could be important enough to interrupt a Joint Chiefs briefing. Ghost 13 is not available through normal channels, the SEAL colonel continued with growing urgency. We need immediate access to psychological warfare expertise for hostage rescue that could prevent American casualties. I felt the weight of the moment as 200 pairs of eyes searched the briefing room for whoever would respond to a call sign that represented 3 years of classified operations protecting American interests worldwide. Deputy Director Harrison stood with the authority that commanded immediate attention from everyone present. Colonel Morrison, Ghost 13 is present in this briefing room. The announcement created ripples of confusion among military officers who couldn't identify any special operations personnel among the assembled leadership. Ghost 13, Colonel Harrison continued with formal authority. You're being activated for immediate operational consultation. I stood from my seat in the middle of the briefing room, feeling the eyes of America's most senior military leadership focusing on someone they had assumed was a mid-level staff officer attending her father's presentation. Ghost 13 responding, I said with the calm authority that had guided me through dozens of crisis situations. What's the operational status of American personnel? The transformation from invisible family disappointment to classified CIA operative was immediate and devastating. 200 senior officers watched the woman they hadn't bothered to notice reveal herself as someone whose operational capabilities exceeded most of their combined experience. Colonel Morrison approached me with the desperate respect of someone whose mission depended on capabilities only I could provide. Ma'am, we have 4 American aid workers held by al-Shabaab terrorists in Mogadishu. Standard rescue operations risk civilian casualties, but intelligence indicates psychological warfare could convince the captors to release hostages voluntarily.
Understood, I replied, shifting into operational mode while aware that my father was processing information that overturned everything he believed about my military career. What's the intelligence assessment of captor psychology and motivation structure? The technical language was devastating in its implications. While my father presented theoretical frameworks about military intelligence integration, I was demonstrating practical expertise that could save American lives in active operations. Ma'am, Colonel Morrison continued with professional urgency. The captors have specifically mentioned Ghost 13 as someone they fear. Your previous operations in East Africa have created psychological advantage that could prevent violent confrontation. The reference to my previous classified missions sent shockwaves through a briefing room that was beginning to understand they were witnessing the revelation of operational capabilities that exceeded anything in their security clearances. My father's face had gone completely white as he processed the reality that his nobody daughter was being consulted by Special Operations Forces about missions that required presidential authorization. Deputy Director Harrison stepped forward to provide context that would complete my family's understanding of exactly who they had been dismissing for 3 years. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the assembled military leadership, "Major Victoria Sterling, designated Ghost 13, commands the CIA's most classified psychological operations unit. Her tactical innovations have prevented multiple international conflicts and eliminated high-value targets across 4 operational theaters." The revelation was systematic and comprehensive, designed to demonstrate that while my father had been stealing credit for my research, I had been conducting operations that shaped international security at the highest levels of classification. Furthermore, Harrison continued with obvious professional pride, Ghost 13 holds security clearances that exceed most personnel in this room, including classification levels that require personal authorization from the President of the United States. Admiral Hayes, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, approached our conversation with growing comprehension of what he was witnessing. "Major Sterling," he said with formal respect, "are you telling us that you've been conducting classified operations while maintaining cover as administrative military personnel?" "Yes, sir," I replied, with the directness that had served me well in hostile interrogations. "Operational security for Talon Division requires deep cover that prevents family members or military colleagues from understanding actual assignment." The implications began sinking in as the Joint Chiefs processed the reality that one of their most classified assets had been hidden in plain sight, dismissed by her own family while protecting American interests worldwide. But the most devastating revelation was still to come. "There's an additional security matter that requires immediate attention," Deputy Director Harrison announced with the authority that silenced all conversation in the briefing room. "General Sterling has been attempting unauthorized access to classified databases containing Ghost 13 operational reports." The words unauthorized access created immediate tension among military and intelligence officials who understood that such activities constituted federal crimes punishable by decades of imprisonment. "The attempts began 48 hours ago," Agent Collins added, stepping forward with digital evidence displayed on classified tablets. "General Sterling has been systematically trying to penetrate CIA databases using his Pentagon credentials." My father stood frozen as 200 senior officers processed the reality that a distinguished military leader had been committing federal crimes in his attempt to understand his daughter's classified work. "General Sterling," Admiral Hayes said with the formal tone reserved for courts-martial proceedings, "are these allegations accurate?" My father looked around the briefing room at the military leadership whose respect had defined his identity for 3 decades, then at me with an expression that combined shock, fear, and dawning comprehension. I was trying to understand what Victoria was actually doing," he said weakly, his commanding presence evaporating as the magnitude of his legal jeopardy became clear. "Her assignments never made sense, and I thought, you thought you could violate federal law to satisfy personal curiosity about classified operations," I interrupted, with the clinical precision I used when interrogating enemy assets. I addressed the assembled military leadership directly, using the authority that came from 3 years of successful operations at classification levels most of them would never achieve. For 28 years, General Sterling has systematically sabotaged my military career because my capabilities threatened his sense of superiority. He stole my research, blocked my promotions, and publicly humiliated me to protect his reputation as the family's military genius. The personal history was being revealed in front of the officers whose opinions would determine both our career prospects, and the comparison between his criminal desperation and my classified achievements was destroying his professional standing in real time. While he was stealing credit for tactical innovations I developed, I was conducting operations that prevented the kind of international conflicts his conventional forces would be required to fight. Deputy Director Harrison provided additional context that would complete my father's professional destruction. Ghost 13's psychological warfare innovations have been implemented across all CIA special operations. Her tactical expertise exceeds most personnel in the intelligence community. Colonel Morrison stepped forward with operational urgency that reminded everyone that American lives were still in immediate danger. "Ma'am, we need immediate psychological assessment for hostage rescue. The operational window closes in 6 hours." I looked around the briefing room one final time at my father's devastated expression and the military leadership who were finally understanding exactly who they had been overlooking. "I need secure communications for operational coordination," I announced with the authority of someone whose clearance levels exceeded most people present. "And I'll require immediate transportation to Langley for tactical planning." As I prepared to leave for operations that could save American lives, I addressed my father directly for what I knew would be the final time, as his daughter rather than a CIA operative whose capabilities he had never understood. "General Sterling," I said with professional formality, "your attempts to access classified information have compromised national security and endangered American personnel worldwide. The Justice Department will handle appropriate legal response." 6 months later, my father was stripped of his security clearances and forced into early retirement after pleading guilty to unauthorized access to classified information. The plea agreement avoided federal prison, but ended his military career in disgrace that would follow him permanently. I was promoted to lieutenant colonel and assigned to command the CIA's newly created Integrated Operations Division, where psychological warfare techniques were combined with conventional military capabilities to achieve strategic objectives that neither service could accomplish independently. The Somalia hostage rescue had been successful beyond all expectations. My psychological assessment identified specific cultural and religious motivations that allowed Special Operations Forces to convince the captors to release all 4 American hostages without violence. The mission established new doctrine for psychological warfare integration with conventional rescue operations. 2 years after the Pentagon confrontation, I received an unexpected letter from my father, delivered through official CIA channels to my classified address.
"Victoria," it began, using my given name rather than any rank or title. "I've spent 2 years trying to understand how I could have been so blind to your capabilities and so threatened by your success." The letter continued for several pages, a career military officer's attempt to process the magnitude of his error in dismissing achievements that exceeded his own distinguished service. "I realized that calling you nobody was really about my fear that you were somebody more important than I could ever become," he wrote with painful honesty. "Your success threatened my identity as the family's military leader, so I tried to destroy what I couldn't control." He concluded with an acknowledgement that came too late to repair our relationship, but provided closure that I hadn't expected. "You transformed the name I used to hurt you into something that protects our country. Ghost 13 represents everything I claimed you could never become, and I finally understand that the nobody in our family was always me." I read the letter once and filed it with other classified correspondence that documented the personal cost of operational security and family dysfunction. Standing in my command center at Langley, coordinating psychological operations that shaped international politics and prevented wars,
I felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had finally stopped seeking approval from people whose understanding was constrained by their own limitations. I was Lieutenant Colonel Victoria Ghost 13 Sterling, commanding operations that protected American interests through methods that officially didn't exist, and I had finally stopped pretending to be anything less than extraordinary. The war for my father's respect was over, but I had moved beyond needing his validation. The people who mattered in my career were the ones who had always understood that true service meant choosing mission over recognition, duty over family approval, and excellence over the comfortable fiction that average was sufficient. The vindication was complete, permanent, and ultimately irrelevant. I had already won the only battle that counted, the one for operational excellence that transcended family expectations and personal relationships. The daughter he had called nobody had become the somebody who protected everything he claimed to value, and that transformation was the most satisfying revenge of all. Sometimes the people who crush you the most are preparing you for something they could never imagine. If you've ever been called nobody by someone who feared your potential, if you've ever had to prove yourself in silence while others took credit, if you've ever transformed pain into power, share your story below. Here, we celebrate those who turn family wounds into unstoppable strength.